Great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Um, Jane, while you're getting your text sorted out, I'll just go over the agenda if that's okay. This, for the recording purposes, is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. Thanks everyone for joining. It is shockingly May 27th. I don't know how these dates come so quickly. This is our agenda for the day. It looks like this.
Maybe if you just
We basically want to walk through the next two council meeting agendas because this is the last scheduled steering committee meeting before both of these meetings. So we have some draft agendas. We want to look at those with you and make them better. And then we want, in addition to doing public comment moment, we want to just go over some additional work around chapter writing and how that's going. And there's other pieces where the steering committee is going to play a bigger role, like the letter from the council, that kind of stuff. And then these are the other pieces of chapters that we're talking about and make sure that we have a plan in place for reviewing and doing edits of that. And that's going to come up a little bit in our review of the meetings as well, because we think it could be helpful to have the steering committee take a first whack at consolidating some edits. All right, that's what we're trying to do here. This feels like the timing jumps from 2 to 3. That is not correct. This should all go to
My bad.
2 o'clock and then end at 3. We're not going to spend 2 hours here together. No worries. Okay. All right. Any questions about what we're doing today? Jane, are you and Julie happy to participate? You're ready to go?
Julie's on her computer, but we'll use my audio, so hopefully it'll work.
Okay.
Should work.
Great. All right. All right, so let's dive in. Minutes are available here. Welcome folks to click through. It's kind of, if anyone needs more time with them, just let me know. There's some thoughts here on June 2nd, so we'll come back at all this. Anyone need a little more time for minutes? Any concerns with the minutes? Nope. Okay, great. Let's treat them as approved. Thanks so much. All right, so let's go into the June 2nd agenda. Again, we're going to do June 2nd and June 9th. I'll just keep sharing my screen for the moment, if that's okay with folks. Looks like we have to do a Teams thing in that room, Liz?
Yes, we have to.
Okay, we need to tell everybody about that. That's annoying. Okay.
It's linked on the website and on the calendar invite. So if they try to join
that's what they'll get.
by video, that will go to that. Yeah.
Okay. So just if we step back for a second, I thought I'd put a sort of objectives on the top of this. Maybe I forgot to do that. This day is really about two big things. One, it's about reviewing the scenario modeling. And then two, the bulk of the meeting we're going to be spending to try to revise and reach as much agreement as we can around sort of our top 50 priority actions, and then have an exercise at the end of the day to explore what a tighter number would be. I'm calling it top 10, but we're going to let sort of the numbers see what happens with that. So that's what we're trying to do in this. We had talked about ending at 3:30 and then having some flex time between 3:30 and 4:30. When we wrote out this agenda, it took us all the way to 4:30. So I think the time got flexed to 4:30, sadly. But let's look at it and see what happened here. The flow of the day is doing our usual sort of quick review of any public input that we had gotten since the last meeting. Then spending an hour with the consultants going over the scenario models. And I think, Jane, if I understand this correctly, they're taking the input from that conversation on Friday and actually running the scenarios, right? They're actually going to have
Apparently,
output.
which I will be amazed, but we're going to see some drafts tomorrow.
Okay.
And then are hopeful that unlike the other meetings where there hasn't been a lot of time for any upfront slide presentations, that we'll be able to post them on Thursday. So
Oh, nice.
people will have some, time with it before Monday.
Amazing. Okay, well, that'll be great. And the idea was put this at the front of the meeting because this is an information that obviously folks have been hungry for, particularly for the cross-sector stuff. And so let's get that and spend an hour. And as you see the rest of the agenda, let's see if we want more than an hour or how that feels. Okay, so that's number one, to do that. Then, oh, by the way, I had, just so you know, I thought since we're all going to be together, or hopefully almost all of us would be together in person, that we'd spend 10 minutes of just like connecting around our task and like really what we're trying to do on June 2nd and in the sort of final throes here. And just have like, even though it's short, just have a quick connecting conversation about our expectations and what we're expecting of each other and what what we're bringing to the story. And so it's 10 minutes, but I do think it's important. And I'll guide that. All right, so here we go. Top 50. Basically, what we're going to need to do is chunk this up. And with Charlotte, we did this when we were going through, and we didn't put it in the agenda to give us a little more flexibility. But essentially, we said, all right, we've got these 4 buckets of top 50 actions. Let's do a bunch before lunch, and then finish it up after lunch, and then take it all the way to 2:35 in our break there. And that is our time to do as much as we can in locking down and building some alignment around the top 50-ish. And then starting at 2:45, we'll run this exercise about getting towards the top 10. And I can show you, or maybe Charlotte has handy the SurveyMonkey, what we're trying to do there. And Jared, thanks for your suggestions there. We played with that tool. We're gonna end up using a different tool like a SurveyMonkey. But the idea there is to do 2 rounds of prioritizations where counselors among the top 50, we give them a certain number. Say, pick your top 10, right? And we'll talk about criteria, and we'll talk about why you would pick certain things and what's in the GWSA and how we think about that, right? But fundamentally, it's pick a top 10 based on these criteria. Then let's have a discussion about what we're seeing, right? And what's important to people and what's going on. And there's an opportunity to sort of influence each other and to some degree make a case for things, but also just to sort of take stock of why people are doing certain things.
Yeah.
And then we'll run it all over again and see if it changes. And whether it's a top 10 or it's a top 8 or it's a top 15, I'm not sure it really matters. I think the data might tell us something. Jared, we looked at the opportunity of doing like a weighting, like, hey, I'm going to put many more chits in this thing because I think it's important. And it just was very challenging to do that with 50. And so we were just saying, well, what happens, what shakes out when we compare all counselors' top 10, say, and have real-time data on that and run it twice. And then we need to leave a half hour at the end to figure out all the other next steps around chapters and this and that. And there's not time to really dive into chapters. However, I will say part of what we're going to be talking about in our top 50, right, starting at, in the morning before lunch, is that text that we've been talking about in our last council meeting that's going to show up somewhere, right? It'll show up in our opening thing that Jared, you and Julie are supposed to write, an introduction to the priority actions. It'll show up in our executive summary. It might show up in the letter from the council, but sort of core text that gets at the issues of achievability, funding, these kinds of things that you all have been talking about and really want to make sure are front and center in people's minds and how they understand these actions. Right, so we will talk about that here. We just don't have time to get into the weeds on every single chapter and this and that. All right, I'll stop talking for a second, but that's the flow that we're seeing. Charlotte and I had an idea about the how substantively to maybe start at the beginning with some of the lower hanging fruit, which are the cross-cutting stuff, the education and workforce and finance stuff, and then also do a round of cross-sector mitigation before lunch so that we feel like we're not like saving some really challenging piece for after lunch. And then after lunch, make sure we spend time working with Ag and Eco and with rural resilience. Okay, enough from me. Jared, go ahead, please.
I just had a clarifying question on the last piece of the agenda.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the finalizing of the chapters and the planned content at 4 p.m., is that going to be primarily talking through the process? I have been working under the assumption based on previous conversations that Secretary Moore and I would be drafting our piece that we'd agreed to kind of after the other, we finished the prioritization and finalization framework in the other chapters, and I just want to make sure there's not an expectation that there would be a draft to review for this meeting,
No.
and that
No.
we're actually working together on that probably the week after or sometime thereafter.
Yeah, I will say yes. And Jared, both you and Julie, I'm going to be tapping you this week. Expect some emails from me as we're trying to play around with text that would eventually show up in that part, but we need to start having on the table on June 2nd. So expect some email traffic from me. But no, I'm not expecting that particular chapter is ready, but I think guts of that chapter are something that we want to put on the table June 2nd to help us with this, trying to build agreement around the actions. Make sense? And quick, Kelly, yes, the survey tool that we'll use will allow a maximum of 10 or whatever maximum number we put in there. So we can choose 8 or 10 or whatever, but it won't let you go over. And I'm only going to distribute it to counselors, right? So we don't accidentally have, members of the public or other folks. If I drop the link in the chat or something, we'll keep it so it's just counselors who are answering. Jane?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I was kind of responding to Jared, but I just wanted to add that right now, and we can talk about this at the end, but I will be, I'm on tap to write the executive summary on your behalf as the first place for the climate action plan. And obviously the prioritization chapter that Jared and Julie are writing together is sort of very key to writing the executive summary for the plan. So I'd like to just be included in the conversation with Jared and Julie and David about sort of that language. And then in that conversation, just put a heightened point on sort of like Julie has her schedule now in the chat, just like scheduling. So we all know when different pieces are going to be done, knowing that others are waiting on them and et cetera. So it'd be good to talk about the language, but then also talk about expectations, because originally we had wanted all the chapters drafted by June 2nd, but Liz and I have been talking and knew that the scientific underpinning chapter that will certainly want to be vetted and discussed by the council, Brian's writing, and he can't start that until we get the modeling. So I was like, after next Monday, Brian would write that. So we'll sort of update and sort of play around with some of the schedules, and then the priority rec chapter, and then the executive summary. So those 3 chapters will probably come later.
Okay, that's helpful. It is scary how it all is down to the line. Okay, so any quick other thoughts around this agenda, right? Starting with the scenario models, diving into the top 50. We will include some text in that. And then spending time in the afternoon to test what a top 10-ish feels like. Any other thoughts on that? Again, it's a 9:30 to 4:30. It's a demanding day for us, and it feels like really important day to come in ready to build as much agreement as we can on these draft priority actions. Jane?
Just one comment about sort of support from counselors and getting counselors to attend in person. Liz has done her best, I think, really strongly encouraging, but it really will be most productive if everybody's there in person. I know there's a couple can't, but I know administration officials will work to rally their colleagues, and if other counselors can do that too, I think that'd be really great for a productive day.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Do we, sorry,
Go
do
ahead. Go
we
ahead.
know yet? Have we heard if folks, counselors who cannot attend?
Fortunately, Leslie Ann cannot attend in person on the 2nd. She's out of country, dealing with family issues, but she will be online. And David and I, in conversations with her, have been kind of thoughtful about highlighting areas that she's most interested in to make sure she's really can participate in those. And David will do his best to really pull her into those conversations. But she's the only one we've heard from specifically.
And that reminds me, Jane, we should make a version of this agenda that actually blocks it out with the substantive pieces.
Yeah.
That's something that Charlotte and I can do,
Yeah, thank you.
so she can see that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe there's a specific request that goes out if counselors, if you're able to reach out to your fellow appointees and say, just make sure that folks are able to attend. That would be really helpful. And Liz Amler is ensuring there's food and coffee and things like that. So that's good.
Yep.
And this is the same conference room we were in last time?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay.
We should do a better job with sugar. I think this.
We were low on cookies and things.
All right. More sweet treats.
I'll work. Liz, you and I can meet at the store first.
Great. Okay. Anything else on that agenda before we look at the 9th? In the big hope, we're not going to do any formal vote per se on the priority actions, but my hope is we have reached as much alignment as we can on them, and we have a sense of how people are feeling about them, right? And so this is something where I think all counselors should come ready to be able to express that. Like, yeah, with this kind of language or this kind of caveat or this kind of wording, I can live with this, right? Understanding that there may be, the future is hard to predict, right? Jared?
I just am wondering, David, if you can say a little bit more about two things. One is what you're envisioning for the process for finalizing priority actions and what has happened since the last time, what's still happening, and what needs to happen because it seems like there's been feedback provided over multiple council meetings that has kind of landed with writing groups that were then organized. Some of them met and were able to agree on changed language. Some said we need to keep working through this, and I think are meeting separately. And so I think it would be helpful for me to just kind of pause and make sure that we're all clear on where we're at in that process, what it's leading to, and then how that will play, how it's envisioned to play out on the 2nd as we work through,
Yeah.
either what we have back or what is still outstanding that may need to be kind of worked through in real time.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that, Jared, and asked that. If you remember, our last touch point was the council meeting last week, right? And we did a fairly quick turnaround on the minutes, and then I kind of dropped the ball on pushing each of you individually on the stuff where we said, oh, David and Leslie Ann will figure that out, or David and so will work on that. That's been dropped a little bit. And so part of my job today after this call is to get all those pieces moving so that when we show up on the 2nd, we can say, yeah, what we've done since we last talked about that concern is we've come up with this alternative language or something like that. There's a number of those you can see here. Let me share the notes. These are the notes from the council meeting last Monday. Hang on just a second. So there's a bunch of stuff of like, oh, we need to fix this definition or define that more clearly. Or if we want, let's say what leading indicators are, right? Or we need to do this, or David and Leslie Ann will adjust the wording accordingly, right? Or something like that. There's a bunch of those, right? Or this one, like Kelly, this was like the one about you, like saying, let's add a line about connecting various organizations that do the work, right? So you and I can go back and forth quickly about what that line is, and we can make a suggested edit in a new version, right? So we'll come to July 2nd with a document that accepts all the previous changes and then has new changes based on all this work that gets done, right? Some of which actually we've already tucked in the document, so I'll be careful about that. But much of this hasn't been dealt with, right? And there's a number of things, right? And this one in particular, like what David Mears put on the table and folks seem to be broadly enthusiastic for, is like, okay, let's write this up. David wrote a few sentences that he sent to me. I'll put that in a document and we can work on that on June 2nd. So that's the process, Jared, is to like get all this work done and get that posted ahead of our meeting next Monday.
With any changes since the last meeting,
In
kind of
track.
clearly shown in track changes. Great.
Yeah. So people can really see like, oh, what's happened since we gave all this feedback.
So it sounds like it'll be a mix of some things that were relatively straightforward and some things that may still need to be worked through during.
Yeah. And honestly, for my money, I think the most challenging piece right now is some of this preamble-y language that'll end up in the chapter that you and Julie write or somewhere else, you know, that really gets at this tension about, you know, how different counselors feel about achievability, about funding, about this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, there's a bunch of work, and a number of you expect to be contacted by me this afternoon as I swing into gear and start to get these changes into the document. All right, should we look at June 9th agenda?
Ask one,
sorry.
I think
Yeah.
we've already, I think I know the answer to this question, but just clarifying again that the scenarios that the consultants are gonna magically have soon is a scenario of 2030, 2035, and 2050. Just 20.
Yeah, they both go out to 2050.
Okay, so, okay. Thank you. That's, I thought, just reconfirming.
Okay. Great. June 9th. June 9th is really about the chapters. Let me share my screen. I wonder actually, Jane, if it'd be better for me to be sharing that. Well, I'll share this for now. We've updated that little PowerPoint that synthesizes all the meetings we have left. We were hopeful. This is about edits to chapters, and in particular, the recommendations chapters, and leaving a little bit of time if there was like little edits we wanted to get done that we couldn't do in real time on June 2nd, that we wanted to give ourselves a little more time, like confirming those at the end. We had this idea that the steering committee might be able to do a first whack at combining edits. I'm not sure how that fits right now because we don't have, help me, remind me, Jane, how we're thinking about this. Are we going to try to get the steering committee meeting next week? I feel like I put a hold in my calendar for next Wednesday.
Yeah, maybe Liz is the best person to confirm where we were with scheduling that. But yes, our hope was many of the chapters are including a revised. I think the only of the sort of chapters that set up the recommendations, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris Campany revised his chapter, which supports the resilience work, but we hadn't quite heard yet from David Mears and Rich around the mitigation and Ag and Eco chapters, because they were sort of leading that consolidation of edits. So Liz was going to do some outreach to them because they were supposed to be revised and submitted as of last week. And the other chapters where edits were going to be made are now made, and we have all of those sort of contextual chapters and then chapters that set up the recommendations. Our hope had been to set a steering committee meeting, give you all the chapters like today, and then work on a consolidated set of edits. And I think was a recommendation that maybe Secretary Moore made around sort of the role of the steering committee. Does it make sense for those edits to kind of try to reach consensus edits in a smaller group as a form of process to support the Climate Council in so much substance for review? And that we wanted to talk about that today. And that would largely include everything for the climate action plan, except for these key chapters we were just referencing. So it wouldn't be the executive summary, it wouldn't be the priority recommendation chapter, and it wouldn't be some of the other things we were going to talk about with you today around who's authoring, which is like the letter from the council and a few other odds and ends that we don't have authors for yet. It just says steering committee right now. So we're going to talk about that stuff later, but that's June 16th is really those chapters. So for June 9th, we thought the best way to process that would be actually processing and agreeing on a set of edits from the steering committee rather than going chapter by chapter with all of you, with everybody.
Yeah, and just an update on that is I did schedule the steering committee meeting for next Thursday afternoon, so that's all set. And then I did receive a revised chapter from David Mears, so we're waiting on mitigation from Rich.
Okay. So the idea there, steering committee folks, is if you would be willing, I mean, we can send it to everyone, but if you in particular are willing to spend the next week looking this over, making some suggested edits, and then we spend an hour on the phone next Thursday, the 5th, trying to sort of tee up a bunch of suggested edits that feel good for you as a steering committee, that could accelerate our work on the full council. Jared?
Yeah, just two things. I know it's more on the context setting chapter rather than directly related to the recommendations, but I know that there are some updates that need to be made to the economics focused chapter based both on some new data and on some suggested revisions from Secretary Moore. So, before things go out, I will work with Ken to, as quickly as possible, get that ready to go out with the other pieces. But the other thing I'm just wondering about is I think that meeting is scheduled for 1 hour from 4 to 5 p.m. at the very end of the day on the 5th. And if Secretary Moore is leaving on the 6th and is away, I'm just worried that we could end up not having enough time to be kind of aware of some things that, might need or benefit from some further steering committee discussion next week. So I'm wondering if we want to schedule earlier additional time. It feels a little bit worrying to only have an hour and to have it at the last possible moment next week.
Yeah, I think there was challenges finding time. Secretary Moore?
Oh, Jane, you got it. All right.
You're good.
Create a horrible echo chamber. Yeah, I can also work with Secretary Clark or with Commissioner Johnson to make sure the administration's interests are sort of being articulated even in my absence. I get that this timing is kind of crummy and appreciate you raising that, Jared. I probably have one of the worst calendars, and so I'm not sure that there's a lot of earlier time. And will do my best to try to get my feedback in sooner than not so that folks have time to consider it in advance of that meeting on Thursday, which may help expedite it. I did want to suggest, David, inviting all counselors to attend that steering committee meeting, and just with the intention of here's what your steering committee is going to do. If you have comments that you feel strongly about, you're on the same schedule, right? Like this isn't first bite at the apple, second bite at the apple. This is bite at the apple, and then we're going to walk through them on the 9th.
Yeah.
And
That's
so if you
great.
want something on the table, you need to put it on the table on Thursday.
Okay. If we wanted to do 90 minutes instead of 60 minutes, is that possible on people's schedule that day? Just out of curiosity.
Starting earlier, or
Either one, I'm curious how it would work for folks.
I could do earlier probably, but later. This is actually happening at the same time as the Just Transition Subcommittee meeting. So I could do earlier because that starts at 4 also. I'm still gonna be missing the first hour, but
Got it.
worked that out.
Yeah, I can extend in either direction.
Why don't we start a half hour earlier if we have a critical mass of all of you?
Great.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So the idea is that we do that and then we come on the 9th and spend a little time reviewing those suggested edits as efficiently as we can. This is going to be an online meeting, our typical sort of 11 to 2 meeting, our war against lunch meeting. So, I mean, the idea there is on the back end of your call on the steering committee call, I will make pull in the edits that we're suggesting into versions and post those, and then we can review them on Monday. I think to make this work, obviously, Liz Amler, getting all 3 of them out. Well, it's really 4 because it's yours with the cross-cutting issues too, right? That's the other one, so it's 4.
It's a lot more than that, David. Don't
Yeah.
sell it short. Don't
Oh,
undersell this.
really?
Because
Uh-oh.
it's all the context chapters
Oh, that
and
too?
all the recommendation chapters.
Oh my
So
God.
just to be clear, this is not a small ask of folks because it's a lot of reading. So I just want to be very clear about that because it's the health chapter, it's the climate change in Vermont chapter that Leslie Ann wrote. It's the economic chapter. It's a lot. It's the chapter on the progress that I wrote, the coordination with other plans chapter. It's a lot of chapters.
Okay.
I
I mean,
think
I
you're
wonder if
right
we
to
want to.
point out the recommendation chapters as the ones that are setting tone and are probably more challenging, but for folks. But what we're asking for reading is a lot.
So well, go ahead, Jared, and then I have a thought.
I mean, I don't know when is the best time to take it. Let me just tell you what I'm thinking of addressing. I have a question about the flow of the agenda on the 9th.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, since we'll have spent most of the meeting on the 2nd trying to finalize top 50 and then top 10 dozen, baker's dozen, whatever it ends up being for top priority actions. I wonder if there is value in kind of finalizing and landing that before we then move to the chapter. Now it kind of feels like we're going to pause on that. Then we're going to go into chapters, some of which are going to, the exact wording will probably depend on where we land on final priority actions and the prioritization within them. Come back to it. So it just felt a little out of order to me. I wonder about moving that confirming final priority actions piece up and land that and then go into the chapter review. But if there's something I'm missing, please let me know.
No, it's a good thought, and we can flip it. I think the reason I had it tucked to the end was I didn't want that to consume the whole meeting. I wanted time to spend on the chapters.
I found it. Yeah.
Right. But if we put at the top and commit ourselves like, hey guys, let's not like blow this thing wide open and spend another 2 hours on this. Let's, do nips and tucks at this point. That seems to make a lot of sense. I can flip that easily. Thanks, Jared. All right. Yeah. And in terms of so many pages of text, I wonder if we want to say, if you had 30 minutes to read, these would be our, what really, we'd encourage you to go this direction. If you had an hour and 30 minutes to read, we'd encourage you to do all of these. So I wonder if there's something along those lines we want to do that emphasizes the the ones that are connected to the priority actions.
We can definitely do that.
Yeah. And we will say that, we're getting this writing support after we adopt the plan, right? And so it's not like we will have actual like editing in plain language help, right? We don't need to do those kinds of fixes later. In this moment, they'll get done later. It's more about content and feeling comfortable that the content's right. Is
Yeah,
that fair,
just to
Jane?
clarify though, the editing will happen for like the full proofread, the full edit of the plan. The plain language, I just want to be clear about that. That was a choice that we've made to pull back a bit on that because we will do a plain language summary document of the CAP and work with the Climate Council on that because that feels like the most valuable use of our resources is to think about like a summary doc for the CAP. That's plain language. Plain language editing, the whole CAP, it was a tremendous lift and one that would change tone and context and have to be very collaborative with the Climate Council and didn't feel the climate office and it made a determination with our secretary and our budget that didn't feel like the best use of our resources in large part because of it would take all summer to have meetings and like change. So we're going to edit the whole CAP so you don't have to catch every grammar and every comma and everything like that. And then we're going to focus resources on a plain language summary and designed thing to hand out on the CAP that's a more limited use of resources.
Thanks, Jane. Helpful clarification. Yeah. Jared?
I wonder if other folks are feeling this way. Part of it is when I look at the agenda for the 9th, it's a little bit, I'm finding myself wanting to feel like I have a clearer sense of our time on the 16th and the 23rd. And so I know that
Slide.
Yeah,
There is a
so I
slide.
know
Yeah.
that there's a slide. So maybe it's helpful to refamiliarize ourselves with that, just so that we know what we're actually trying to finish by the 9th versus what will then be picked up on the 16th or
So think of this as a working slide that I can make edits to. And David, I apologize, I hadn't posted it, but I still had it open from David and I and Liz connecting at the end of last week and sort of sketching through what we're doing. And so can continue to edit it. But June 2nd, the models, David reinforced this with me. We want to really think of it as finalizing the 50 recommendations and then advancing criteria and that initial set of the top 10 list on the 2nd. June 9th then is that however we want to characterize it in the agenda you're working on right now, but it's really the content of the climate action plan and then final review of that top 10 list is what I've been thinking, David. If we need to go back to the top 50, we can. I can add that in as a nip and tuck, as you just said. And then, June 16th, you guys think about what else you'll need and we can edit this, but there'll be these new chapters you won't have seen yet, which are some of them, the public engagement chapter shouldn't be that, challenging. It's really a great summary that Sophie has worked on with CBI, and that's with Just Transitions right now to really have that editing and look at. And it's really just a summary of what we did for the climate action plan. And then those other chapters around the executive summary, letter from the council, and then what needs rulemaking and legislative action. That's a table that we did last time. That's something our office is willing to pull from the CAP, but then make sure we've characterized it the way the council wants to characterize it. Those are 3 substantive things to discuss on the 16th. And then I'm not sure what else on the 16th. Leave that to you. And then the 23rd is the last meeting where we adopt the plan, and then anything you all want to say about the legislative session, and what's coming from that. But I don't know what's missing, what else is here, needed. And then, of course, we have June 30th, the following Monday, if we need it, but both David and I are scheduled to be on vacation. So I think neither David nor I want to go to June 30th, but we can.
Ironically, I'm back from vacation on June 30th. And I'm
Oh.
on vacation on the 16th and the 23rd, but we're making it work. All right. Yeah. So Jared, I don't know if that helps clear up your thoughts on this.
Should. They should also have the scientific underpinning chapter. Trying to keep, this is like my running list. So,
I just sent more in the chat too.
okay, thank you.
Land acknowledgement. Oh my gosh. Right.
The land acknowledgement. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing. And keep
It's helpful
fixing.
though. Thanks, Jane. Jared, you had brought that up. Any thoughts from you when you see that schedule?
I think that if we're planning to review a draft on the 16th of the consolidated recommendations and executive summary, uh, and if Secretary Moore and I are working on that, I'm wondering, what is that? Are we going to need to find time? We can take this offline if necessary, but I'm just wondering what time that will be if you're away from the 6th to the
15th. Yeah, that's tricky.
Or do we need to have that be a final piece that is on the 23rd? I don't know, but just noting that scheduling challenge.
Thanks for flagging that, Jared.
Yeah, you go.
Sorry.
Yeah, that is something, and it makes me think, like, I wonder if we can make progress this week and early next week on that. Because I'm imagining the guts of what you're trying to write is part of what we need on Monday for us to be able to feel like we're building alignment. I know it's chicken and eggy, but I think there is some back and forth with that.
I'll just speak for myself. I have almost zero time this week. I can devote a chunk of time next week to it, but having something together before Monday would be very, very difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I get the chicken and egg problem, but I also feel like knowing the top 10 is going to be important to that effort as well.
Fair. Fair. Okay.
I think it just really hones, David, and like highlights the importance that Monday really is about the recommendations and really just driving home, like, this is the decision day, like in large part.
Right. I do want to check with all steering committee members though, because I feel like when we've talked about the recommendations and people's openness to, being comfortable with them, time and time again, we've talked about this sort of preamble-y language that would need to accompany them and the kinds of things that would need to be in that language. So I do think there's a little bit of intimate connection, not like a detailed chapter, but just like, hey, these are some key points that we're going to need to put in to tee this stuff up. And I'd be willing to hear views on that, but my sense from what I've heard from you is that's really important. Joey?
Yeah, I'm just listening and trying to process all of this. So, just on the sort of related to the preamble and the importance, as you noted, on like get really honing in on priority recommendations and just, related to the context you're going to set for us on Monday, David, and like what's in the narrative and like stage setting. I mean, I think I'm just curious how you think about how the steering committee thinks about setting the table to guide people's thoughts on the recommendations that need to show up based on what the GWSA asks us to deliver. I'm just trying to, because there's a lot to sift through, and then there's the GWSA provides us sort of a lens through which we need to sift. I'm just curious how, because it's so much. But it just speaks to me to the narrative that, Jared and Secretary Moore are also co-crafting. It seems like these are all generally very well connected. So I'm just curious how we're thinking about that. And
Well, it's a good point. I want to, like, I am hopeful that you as a steering committee, as members of the steering committee, are able to be key voices in constructing and listening to each other for the things that would be most important to each other and helping to build some alignment. And so we don't have a ton of time right now today for us to do that on this call to make sure we are aligned to what it means to, like what you say, Joey, of like the GWSA gives us, you know, the criteria and the roadmap for what we're supposed to do, right? And there is a context today staring Vermont in the face that also needs to be mentioned, right? That is part of like how you show up in an update. And how do we talk about that context and what it means for the work of the council and the work of climate action, right? So I think that's the collision, right? Because every time I hear someone say, oh, the GWSA tells us what we need to do and, you know, there's a legal obligation, then I hear someone else say, and we have a context today that also demands us to be real. And so I think melding those two things is kind of the key contextual conversation I'm trying to get down on paper and to be that sort of opening language. Does that make sense, Joey?
yes, related to that big thing, but then also, yes, I mean, that makes sense also, though, like I look at some of the priority recommendations in this survey and they're just so wildly different scales, and some of them speak to how you would make them happen and some of them don't. It's just a very, like, I don't know, it's a wide ranging gamut.
Yes. And it is kind of what it is at this point. I will just put it that way, that there's going to be some of that. And we can do our best to clean it up, create some more likeness to the altitude of these different priority actions. And it's part of what this exercise around further prioritization in top 10 is intended to do, right? Like amongst all this, what do we really need to pay attention to and lift up even more loudly? So that's part of the effort of the further prioritization. I want to be thoughtful about our agenda. I kind of like really cruise through public comment, in part because I didn't see members of the public. I think William's iPhone is Billy. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I just want to pause, and if I was wrong about that, if there's somebody here who wants to offer a comment.
Yeah, that's just me. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Billy. Yeah. Okay. If folks are okay, I'd like to do this last piece of the agenda. And we've kind of gotten into it a little bit with the chapter writing, but there's a piece that we haven't really nailed down yet. And Liz and Jane, you can help us with this. This has been referenced a little bit. Letter from the council, acknowledgements, next steps from the council. Doesn't have a lead author yet. Jane or Liz, do you want to walk us through what would be most helpful right now from the steering committee?
Yeah, so I'll start with next steps from the council first. So on next steps and acknowledgements, it's at the responsibilities page has me with the steering committee. So I'm trying to support it as best as I can. I starting with the next steps from the council. That's also like connect with Climate Action Office. So I'm drafting that page. But there is a section that I noticed from the last cap that has kind of basically like the council didn't get to XYZ and here's like a bullet list of what's going to be addressed moving forward. And that's the part that I'm looking for support with from the steering committee on what to plug into that. With the acknowledgements, I'm going through that right now and just kind of updating. It lists out from the last cap the council members, subcommittee members, co-chairs, and it lists out everyone who helped with the cap. So I'm working on updating that right now. I'll get that to you for a review. And then letter from the council, that's the one that we need to identify someone to author.
Got it. Do we want to start with, you had some specific questions around the next steps. Did you want input right now from the steering committee on this, or are you?
It,
is some
it
other
might
way?
it might be too soon, but just knowing that at some point they will need to, if they want to do something similar from the last cap in the letter, it would be helpful to get the input from the steering committee in terms of what was not addressed in this, and what the council would like to work on moving forward, kind of thing.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe that could be an agenda item for a future steering committee. I'm not sure how they would like to, or if someone just wants to write it. I mean, it could go about different ways, but
Okay.
what they would like to do there.
Yes, I'll just chime in and say, in the last climate action plan, there were intentional areas that we weren't able to get to due to time or lack of consensus, challenging that were, or TCI, things like that caused us to identify specific areas of work. I would garner, unless you all feel differently, we don't need to call out anything like that this time. It's more about a statement about what kind of posture is the council in after you adopt this plan? Or is there a focus on thinking about funding and financing for the climate action plan? Is there a space of like a handoff and leaving it to sort of the legislature, the government to work? I think that to me is sort of what's needed, is a tone for next steps, understanding that there aren't substantive areas of work that aren't getting filled in this climate action plan. So, and you all have already said, which is why Liz is authoring this chapter particular, that most of that should be a signal that we have a climate office, and you should direct questions about that to the climate office and the role of the climate office in this space. And so we're doing that. But if there's active components that the council wants to say here, Liz can feed that in, and that's a good highlight.
Thanks, Jane. Jared.
I generally agree with Jane that hopefully there won't be the same big outstanding pieces that there were the first time. And so while we may have a chapter on next steps, it may not have as much in it. I think, one obvious piece that I can think of would be kind of our timeline in terms of, this is the climate action plan for the next 4 years, and the council will continue to monitor each of the areas that were charged to us in the Solutions Act in advance of a revised plan by July 1st of 2029. But in the meantime, this is the plan that we've developed, and if we can be of service, we, stand ready for, legislative or administrative requests for review or input. But I think providing a clear signal that, this is the plan, and when the next revised plan would be due, but not, I hopefully there aren't major pieces of outstanding work to flag.
Okay.
Unless I'm missing something that's
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work identified in the priority actions, right? That's the work, right?
right, exactly. It moves from recommendations to implementation.
Yeah. Okay, so just in the interest of time, it sounds like folks are maybe generally aligned around that, how the next steps is a little bit different than last time. I wonder, Liz or Jane, if you want to take a whack at just writing up a paragraph or something, and then the steering committee can look at it, the council can look at it, something like that.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, same with acknowledgements. And then the letter from the council, typically that would be from co-chairs. In this case, it's really the steering committee that's the leadership voice, right? And so it's like a letter from the steering committee on behalf of the council, right? I think is the what you're looking at here. And you need someone to write it, or take a first whack at it. I'm curious if anyone here on this call wants to do that, if feeling compelled by that, or Jane?
Oh, no, I'm not volunteering.
Okay.
Well, not off mute, but that was an accident.
Again, these things don't need to be long, right? You're going to have an executive summary, right? This is more of a sort of introductory thing of like, hey, hey, legislature and world, right? This is what we did here and da 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 da, right? So I wonder if we want to aim for short, right? It feels like at this juncture, long letters are not helpful.
I do think in the first plan, the letter is the place some of the components you've been talking about, David, live though. Like it does set the context of the world we're living in, the federal government, the challenge.
Yeah.
It's a short but sweet context setting letter. It feels very important to me, I'll say, but from where
Right.
I sit. And
Yeah, Jane,
with the
yeah.
model from last time, I believe it was Lauren, Jared, remind me if I'm wrong, because I just see you on screen, or Julie, but I think it was Lauren and Chris who wrote it.
Liz, didn't you help
Maybe
write?
it was Liz, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And we were just looking, Jane and I were just looking at one from a main document, this resilience document, which did a nice job of like
Nice job.
naming like, hey, the world is different right now. We need to be paying attention and da 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 da, right? It was, yeah. Liz?
We could share some examples of other ones that are relevant to this moment in time that might be helpful.
Yeah.
Like that one.
Sure, I was just wondering as I was hearing the back and forth, how you think it differs from some of the preamble stuff that we expect is going to be. Like maybe this is just a question that we address in, what will feel like forever from now, 2 weeks from now. Because it's a little hard to know. It feels like some of it's going to get covered in some of the other discussion pieces to the extent we end up putting in caveats or preambles or explanations on some of the areas we've discussed. So
Okay.
You all feel like you do not need it. You can also say that. Like maybe if it's covered, or maybe if you want people's attention to go to the priority rec chapter or the executive, you might not need it, but I don't know if David, if we want to acknowledge that if we are writing one, someone from the steering committee will create the first draft and we can hit on this again at the meeting next week for the steering committee to set the stage for that.
Right. I think I'm with Liz Miller to some degree, like the language that we hopefully can settle on that tries to articulate the need of, doing what the GWSA tells this body to do, understanding what the current context means for our work today. Like that's like the core text we're trying to work on. And that I can imagine that sort of cut and paste up into a letter as well, And it's okay if it's a little bit of a repeat, if it's the core messages you're trying to send. So I think waiting till after next Monday is not a bad idea. And then maybe I can corral someone on Monday to take a lead on it.
That
I'll
sounds
build
great.
out extra cookies.
We might just have to go straight chocolate.
Yeah, straight chocolate. Yeah. All right, I think we're done here.
Sorry.
This we talked about earlier. Liz Amler is going to push hard to get to all of you and counselors ASAP, whether it's today, tomorrow morning, all these chapters. And then we're going to move our meeting up a half hour next Thursday. So we have 90 minutes. Julie's going to work internally to try to get the administration to consolidate edits. We're going to invite counselors to participate in that. And our goal is to come up with some consolidated edits that feel like the right thing to propose. Okay.
Thanks,
Anything else?
David.
Anything else? Joey? Yeah.
I'm really sorry to do this, but just looking a little bit more closely at the survey,
Mhm.
curious if we might, well, because some of this does not reflect public input, right? Like we got some recommendations that maybe we'd want to have as a priority. Can we just have like a couple of other boxes where we write in other
I think
priorities?
we need to do that earlier in the day. What we can do is, based on our conversations around the top 50, this is editable in real time. So we can change this based on the conversation around the top 50. So if there's something that's an other, bring it up earlier in the day when we're talking about the top 50, be like, hey, this is really important. It's not here yet. And then the council can decide if it makes that cut, and then we can include it in the list here.
Joey, do you think you're referring to, because I also think there's going to be more, David, that materialize this week through the conversations that still need to happen from last week's climate council meeting. So like the implementation of the Superfund law, right? Like that's one that's not on that list. It might be a priority. You're working on language, a small group of counselors on that, or David Muir's suggestion that's not on that list right now, but there's a small group of counselors. So all of those things, there's still going to be new things added to the 50 list between now and next Monday, and those will all show up on the list.
And we can change them in real time.
Yep.
Right?
Okay, that's helpful clarification. Thank you. All right, sorry, it's 3:04.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Who?
We will see you all. Expect emails from me starting now-ish to get all this going. Appreciate everybody's help. And I look forward to seeing everybody. I really do. And I think we've got an important day ahead of us next Monday. So,
Thanks so much.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.
in Berlin.